The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events, the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, see everything we do. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Plein Air and Fine Art Connoisseur magazines. Today, a great plein air painter, Lynn Gertenbach, and this video is called Illumination.
Hi, I'm Lynn Gertenbach. I'm happy to be here with you today, and I would like to share with you a study that I did on location that I would like to take to a larger piece. I call it Illumination. It was a magical day down at the lagoons at Malibu Lagoon when I painted a small study. Actually, I was in the midst of painting something else. And when I turned around and saw this huge cumulus cloud rising up with the sun behind it, illuminating it, I knew I had to grab a quick 8x10 and do it quickly because it would only last a half an hour, which is approximately the time I spent on the little study. I'll show that to you first, and I'll show you why I did it from life. You see, when you photograph a cloud with landscape, generally your camera, unless you've got an excellent camera, is going to, it's very difficult to photograph clouds, I found. Of course, even with a polarizer filter. But since it's air, the camera doesn't focus on it, and it tended to give me terrible photos. So that's why I took the photos after I had done the sketch, because I knew I could get the effect with this. And I'll turn it into a larger one now. Just so you know the photo quality, this is what happens. The darks get so dark that you don't see any detail in it at all. So what I did is I used it strictly for location reference and don't actually need these to work from, but I felt good having them. But you could see that was one of those instances when painting from life really is essential. I'd like to share with you the materials that I use. I have a glass palette with non-glare glass that's actually tacked onto a food tray that's set on top of a board here. It has gray, very light gray, medium tone Maitianis paper under it so that it won't glare and it won't be white when I have a lot of light around. I use actually a large amount of white. And it's a soft titanium or the My Mary or the Winsor Newton. All of them I like very much, and as long as they're a soft formula. And then I took the cobalt blue and mixed it with white here. That's this color. Not all of these are tube colors, so that I wanted you to know these are pre-mixed by me for the painting ahead of time. Then there is a cerulean. Then there's a cad green light, a viridian. There's cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, and a sap green. This, I believe, is a mixture. This is a mixture of sap and ultramarine and alizarin. Then in the yellows, I have cad yellow light, I have cad yellow medium, I have cad orange, yellow ochre, and then I have the golden ochre, and I have the red, cad red light. I have a terra rosa, an alizarin crimson. I have dioxazine purple and a little bit of the chromium red oxide. Now these two colors here are derivatives with just adding white to the dioxazine purple. It's just so it's on hand and a lighter value. Generally, if I'm doing a cloud scene and I know ahead of time that the light is going to change fast, I pre-mix a few colors. Even when I'm working in the studio, I do, to give myself large amounts of the colors that I like to use. I don't like to dip into the other colors because it dirties them up and then you don't have any clean color on your palette. So generally, I always use a palette knife, which is actually a painting palette knife, to mix with. And I love the fact that I can just take the paint out and make my globs, and then halfway through the painting or so, I'll scrape it all clean, start over. But I will save some of the pre-mixes in the grays if I think I can use them somewhere else. Sometimes they are actually too dull of a gray to look good, but they can always be livened up by adding a touch of orange or cerulean blue to warm it up or cool it down, and then you have like a mother gray to use in some areas of the landscape, which I find very useful. A lot of times I'll save a warm scraping in a cool scraping from the day's work, and then I can start with nice landscape colors and tone those, being careful not to get it too chalky or milky. So I'm watching the amount of white I use with that. So without further delay, I will show you how I'm going to start. This particular painting, I'm going to minimize the landscape. Of course, I've got the canvas, which I like dividing into thirds, this being a third and a third and a third and a third. Now, I haven't drawn it on in charcoal as I often do if it's a more complex composition. And the canvas that I use is a linen. I use, actually I like both Fredericks and Claeson's linen. In the Claeson's, I like the number 13 and a 15. A 15 especially for the landscape painting. And I tone it with a mixture of alizarin crimson, a little burnt sienna, and a touch of sap green, just a touch. And then I use a non-toxic BioShield thinner, and I thin it down, tone it with a rag, and let it dry overnight before I start painting on it. I do this with almost all of my panels. Now, let me tell you about my brushes. I've used filberts for years, and I like those for clouds and landscapes. And I also like the larger brushes for laying paint in. So I have a combination of flats and brights and filberts for this painting. I have various sizes from 2, 4, 6, 8, and then I like the larger ones like 10, 12 for laying in clouds. This particular little brush is a blender by Lowell Cornell, and it's not a Badger blender, but it's a soft brush that really works well after you've laid your heavier paint on with the bristle brush, then going to the blender to soften certain areas. This is wonderful for clouds. It comes in all sizes. I believe this is an 8, and it comes in a 10 and a 12. So these range from Lowell Cornell's to Grimbacher, Filberts to various brands, and they work well. Then I have a painting knife that I use to mix my colors with, a fairly flexible knife, which I also use in my paintings from time to time. So I like to pre-mix large amounts so I'm prepared for a good-sized canvas. Okay, we're going to get started. I wear cotton gloves inside of vinyl so that it protects my hands, and an apron. Why get paint all over me? And I'm going to start with probably a number 6 brush, and I'm going to pre-mix some sap green for drawing with a little alizarin, maybe a little of the Terra Rosa as well. I just have various mixtures here. I've got this mixture here of a little sap green and the raw sienna, or the other tone, which I said was Terra Rosa. And I'm going to just use that to sketch in the landscape here in the lower third portion, which, like I said, I'm going to minimize slightly. So because we're trying to use it as a foil to enhance the beauty of the cloud. We don't want to get too busy there. So There is also a mountain in the distance. I'm going to probably want to indicate lightly where the horizon is going to be and where the mountain will be. Here, and then this lovely silvery river that passes through. It's just lit up wonderfully by the sky. Get that in there. See, I'm just making very bold indications. The actual tree shapes will come in later. I want to show how this river winds back in the distance behind here, and this land comes out there. So this will be wiped out slightly, and this land will come in front of there. So now to cool down that green, if I were to lay that in right now, I would then use some, probably I would use the cobalt blue and a little ultramarine and a little of the terra rosa with some of the sap. If I'm getting into larger mixtures for the cloud, I will be using the knife to mix, but for now, we're okay for just the sketching part. These will just be bold shapes because the detailing in the actual landscape itself with the trees, I will make those later. I'm just going to indicate various shapes and forms back in there. And anything that goes back a little bit further, by the way, this just happens to be a little leftover paint that I mixed from Viridian and a little bit of the dioxazine purple and a little bit of yellow ochre. So I'm using that to diminish the value as it goes towards the back, because this line here goes back and that's receding. Now that will probably be the darkest area. There will then be part of that scene are the reeds that are growing out of the water, but we're not going to make them definite yet. They're just going to be a shape for now. To indicate where everything is going. Because the cloud will be, of course, if I'm out in nature painting, I handled it different last time. I put this in extremely fast and went right for the cloud, which was disappearing very rapidly. And then I carried on with the landscape. But since we're in studio, I'm handling it a little different, still sketching it in roughly because that's my lay-in. And this will be a hillside. Probably I'll have some dimension on that. There was, which the photos don't show, but my sketch does, an interesting kind of mauvey lavender color in some of the trees that were in front of the darker ones. This is the color variation that I like to try to get outdoors. It's subtle and it's all in very dark tones, which is difficult to see. That's what happens in moonlight paintings. When I go out painting moonlights, I always try to select an area that's near a water where it would be reflecting in the water, because that is enchanting to see moonlight reflected in the water. But you've got to be fast, all pre-set up with your colors pre-mixed and ready to go, because once the moon comes up, it proceeds to get darker and you can't see your colors very well. Okay, these go back. There'll be these trees here. And we'll get a little The thing that I also found is kind of fun when you're working on location is you move quickly and you grab a little pure color now and then. It's surprising how lively that makes the painting when you're working with a lot of grays. So we'll start sketching this in, and this landscape in here will be a little cooler. Verticals are tough. Instead of cranking the easel up and down, I tend to just get a little lower because it's too much trouble. I'm waiting for an electric easel. But for large verticals, it's a lot of reaching. But I find it best enhances this composition for the cloud study because it's not a horizontal piece to me. It's all about the rising illumination quality of that cloud. It almost has a spiritual feeling to me. There's something about illuminated clouds that feel like that. And even that time of day, it was a wonderful, peaceful feeling then, painting it. Again, working in this low value range, just indicating some cools, warms, and close values here, which I can always work into later with more variation and more definition. But it's to give the tone and value and set the land down and see that's about at the right range. And of course there's going to be reflections in the water of everything. And it's all going to be in vertical strokes. I thought I would let you know that I'm laying this in and painting the entire painting with my favorite medium, which is walnut oil. It's completely non-toxic, and when I discovered this is all I use. It has no odor, and it's very good mixed with the paints. Now, safflower oil is also something that artists use in Europe, especially when we travel, because you can find it easily in a grocery store. But I love the walnut oil, the texture, I love the drying time. In fact, you can even clean your brushes with it, and that's sufficient. Otherwise, for a good cleaning though, and what I do use in my large container here is I have some BioShield number 23 by Eco Products, because I find that it just takes more of the paint off. I try not to use too much of it because when it gets into the paint, it dulls the color a bit. So I'm using an actual relatively small brush for this. For good paint application, I think I'll move to a larger one. I try to make sure all the paint's off of that first, then dip it in a little walnut oil, wipe that so it doesn't get too full of liquid. Because you do want that nice look of paint. In the beginning, however, though, I generally like to work thinner. In other words, the term fat to lean. And then you've got those nice transparent colors showing through. The transparents would be alizarin, alizarin crimson, which I just put here. Of course, the transparent red oxide, which probably I won't use much of in this painting. And this more of an earthy color. Then there's, of course, sap green and the ultramarine blue. These are the nice transparents that I work with to lay in. There is Indian yellow that I sometimes mix into my raw sienna. It livens it up. Otherwise, raw sienna is a fairly dead color, and that's transparent. So I can use a little of that to lighten something. But all the other colors are not transparent, they're opaque, and those are good for building up color. But for now, I'm going to use these and get this laid in, then we'll start on the clouds, and then we'll start refining things. I'll show you how I work then. Let's see, this, as I said, the river is just a reflection of what's above it and around it. So it's going to have lots of different colors off the palette. Generally, I forgot to take out little globs of white, which I put throughout the canvas so that I do not have to go into the big white with a paintbrush and get it all dirty. White is something you want to stay white, and this can be used to tint in varying amounts. So it's handy to have just smaller amounts like this. So again, we'll just get all these colors laid in. You can see you don't have to be too careful in the beginning. It falls into place as you start working and building up. You see, it's very handy to work with the transparents because you can see where you actually want to put a few more. Now, alizarin crimson from time to time can be a little transparent, but not as much as some of the others, like the sap green. But sap is a warmer green, alizarin, viridian being cooler. Viridian is actually cooler, but then if you mix a little bit of ultramarine blue with your sap green, you can cool it down. Okay, let's have I'm going to go fairly thin because I'm going to want to reflect that cloud in the water, but I'm laying in just enough groundwork here. So, because the water, when it comes toward you, has a little bit more of an intensity in color. So I'm putting lots of color in there now, small amounts, just sketching it in, later to be refined, as I said. And I will also deepen the, now these are vertical strokes, which will be changed once I get into the reflections. There will be some horizontals coming across there. It's a nice warm glow. I find it helps a lot to tone the canvas to a warm tone because it's sort of opposite of the greens that I'm using, and I do like the sparkle of the transparent warm tone showing through from time to time. So you may too. You can try that. I think I'll take this black out of here, which I didn't even indicate that I had on my palette before. And I don't think it's going to belong there. So I'm moving it so that I don't mistake it for sap green because it is a similar value. Okay, we have those two here for the darkest dark. It's going to get quite dark there. And then I like cobalt and Viridian for the reflections. I also like using alizarin in places. We're just roughing this in now. I'll get to the lighter part. I graduate from dark to mid-tone to light, or mid-tone, then some of the darks, and then light. But that way you're building the painting almost like you're sculpting it. All right, now I think I'll lay in a little bit before I put, well, let's see, I can indicate that part. A few dark trees there. In some cases, you'd be surprised, you can almost use ultramarine blue straight, and in night scenes you can use a little alizarin, and it works just great as a dark. Don't want to use too much ultramarine. It can, just in small amounts like I'm doing in the trees, but no large areas of it, because it sometimes is such a dead color used in large areas that it would cut a hole in the canvas rather than look like a shadow. And warm in the shadow is always better for your darkest dark, and you could work into that with some of the cools, because obviously not all of your darks are going to be cool, warm. Now I'm getting some these tones. The mountain behind, that's what I think I'll pre-mix a little of now. Move some of this paint away. There's my nice dark, which has gotten a little bit of light in it. If that happens, I scrape it all off, throw it away, because it will no longer be a pure dark. Once it gets a little light in it, any white paint into any of the darks contaminates it for being used as a dark. We have to be, and that's why, have you ever seen paintings in shows that have that kind of milky, hazy quality? Now, if it was a hot, foggy day and it was meant to be that way, that'll be fine. But if it wasn't meant to be that way, then it really doesn't work in the painting. To achieve and keep the contrast in your work, you really do need to keep your colors separated on the canvas. An area for darks, making sure that none of the midtones or any of the lighter colors which you have used gets into the dark areas. That's why I'm separating them. And from time to time they'll want to drift over there, but we're not going to let them. I'm going to mix that color for the mountain, which I'll probably use a little cobalt blue, and I'll probably use a little of this, which was alizarin and terra rosa. And then I'll use a little purple. Looks like I'm using a lot of color, a little cobalt blue and white. But you see, you come up with some nice mixtures when you mix some warms and cools like that. Just try it until you get something you like. And unfortunately, we often don't mix enough once we like something, like I didn't do here. Got to start all over again. But that's good color practice, because we have to get used to, that's a little too purple. Use a little yellow. Whoop, don't like that yellow ochre in there. You find out through mixing. I used to spend hours and hours and hours mixing so that I got used to what colors did. And I found it was such a valuable lesson, because I found some mixtures that that I had mixed on a color chart, for an example, that turned out quite good. And then when I put them next to other colors in the canvas, as you know, everything is relative. So if you put a certain color here and it's next to another color, a warmer color, it's going to change that entirely. A black and white in a painting, a landscape painting, will appear to be a beautiful green, when you've got it in a landscape with some other warms or with a number of other colors, it will, sometimes in a landscape where there's warm colors, it's too harsh to use a green right next to a, say, autumn red tree. It would be better to use a warmer green. Even the blue in the landscape, as it converges, will change. It'll become a little lighter, a little bit more cerulean. Now, some of the sketching is done. There was a little bit more detail on this mountain, which I'm really not going to add, and here's why. The whole painting is about the illumination of the cloud. Again, I'd like to focus on that and cut down some of the detail wherever I can. I may put a hint of fog moving through there because that's a nice effect. It's probably time to get into the sky before going any further with detail here in the water or elsewhere. And the reason is we don't know how light or dark we're going to get here until we get that cloud in. This will be nice to get into that water. But that's an indication probably of how light we will go. Now I think I'll switch to a larger brush, although I could, since this was used for light paint, I'd be okay to start the top of the sky, which I often do. I will maybe just do a very light indication of where the shape of the cloud is going to come. And come right in here. Just so you know where your light is going to be concentrated on. The little dark areas. This is going to be the magic area. It's going to have some contrast there. So I won't paint any blue there. Mainly because it won't be easy to get a clean color over it. So I'll start, well, I'm going to move that up, but that's all going to be light. So I'm going to paint the blue of the sky up to about this point. It's just so that I can get a nice clean light color appearing in there, and then I will start with the dark. So I'm going to clean that area up. Clean brushes make a big difference for clean color and a clean palette. I know it sounds time consuming, but it's worth it. some of a little cerulean and a little of this cobalt and white for the sky. And of course, you don't want anything totally pure, so because it will be too harsh, you see, of a blue. So to tone that down, I may just add a smidgen of orange or a little cad red light. But see how tiny? Just a little bit, because you want it to retain the blue hue, but you don't want it to scream at you. And you have to be careful that you haven't overdone it. So a little too much orange. Actually, orange I will probably leave out if I were to mix this again, because it just seemed to, even a smidge was a little too much. But sometimes it works. So this time I'm going to use this to lay in the sky. Now I'm going to see, it appears pretty bright. So there's a possibility I'm going to warm that up, which I think I will. I'll add just a little bit of my yellow to that mixture. I think that's going to do it. Every painting is an experiment. You try something, you put it down, and if you think it should be lighter or darker, you go over it. Instead of, you don't always need to scrape. There are times when you will need to scrape. That's better. That's better. Now, if I feel I've got too much paint on there, I can scrape it and start using my warmer version of that, because I seem to like that better. It's more reflective of that time of day, that sunset glow. I find that linen canvas, once you get into it and can afford it, you can buy it by the roll and have it stretched. It really is so nice to work on, although I have found people are now saying that the synthetics are also great. They are great because you don't want too coarse of a canvas to use for clouds. There is a synthetic out that works pretty much like linen. It won't have the weave and the texture, but it serves the purpose when you want to use a smooth canvas. I use various types because sometimes I want the drag of a textured canvas. In this case, I don't really. I've warmed it up considerably as it goes down towards the horizon, because I will bring a couple dark clouds over that. And now I'm taking a little of this, just lightening it, because the sky near the horizon does get lighter and a little bit more cerulean. Now, I'm not going to paint that too heavy in this area due to the fact that we're going to bring some rays from the cloud up into that. That's going to be light cloud in there. There's a benefit to pre-mixing, you see, because you can pick up large amounts and cover it well. Just add ever so small of a dash of medium if you like. Otherwise, if you've got good quality paints that are creamy, you don't need much medium at all. It's always better to use mostly hue and less medium, because you get a cleaner painting. There's an even quality of light throughout the painting. I find that when you tend to use too much medium, there's those dry spots on the canvas or shiny spots, and it's uneven and it's difficult to manage smoothing those out. Some people use liquid on a dry painting to smooth them all out, and others wait till it completely dries, which would be in about 6 months actually for most thick paintings, and then they would varnish it with either Krylon or there's a couple of other real good varnish. I don't use Damar anymore, but after a bit I'll show you what I use on the varnish. Right now we'll just get into the paint part here. Now I think I'm ready to start mixing some of the cloud colors. Where I see some light areas, again, I'm going to again wipe it out of blue because this is going to be a nice warm coming in there. I don't want any blue in that. So, and that's going to be the warm too. Save it, because you go back and forth with your colors. Many times you put it down and you're going to go over a section with the other color you're using, which you should. You shouldn't paint inside the lines and make it a number painting. So you want some of this color back to go back into. So I always leave sky color, a little bit of a mixture, but if I want to get my other colors clean, I try to make a nice big space for it, because again, nice big space. I could use a palette from here to here, but this is good for right now. But on larger pieces, I actually do use a very large palette. Now I'm going to put a few colors around here, but I'm going to select from those as to what's going to work best in the cloud, because I'm going to make a mixture. This is where the luminosity comes in, of the warm and cool together. I will use some cerulean, a little cobalt, and then you see I won't use just one color. I'll be using several and going back and forth with the warm and cool, as I said. So let's come up with some cloud mixtures. Looks like that needs more intensity. Some colors just fade on you. They don't have the intensity. I kind of tend to want to stay away from the phthalos because it takes over and it can really be treacherous. So I never recommend using them. And for a lavender that's a softer lavender, you could use cad red in there. Actually, most of the time I use vermilion or cad red, not medium, but just cad red straight. Especially Winsor Newton makes one that's the purest and most intense color. So I like that. You get your favorites after a while. But if you use the alizarin to make your alizarin in blue, any blue, to make your lavenders, it will be more intense, such as this. And sometimes it's a little too strong. So that's why I use the warmer red with the blue. It works quite well. Let's put a stroke down to see how that's going to look. It's a teeny bit dark, but that's okay. We're going to need some dark. I always start darker and work my way into lighter tones, a little bit of blue. Then I'm going to take out some orange and yellow. Now the whole procedure is going to be going back and forth with warms and cools in this, and I'm going to be working away on it, and you'll know that I have used the cad red and the alizarin and the blues, as I mentioned before. I think I'll get a little extra light blue mixed by taking my cobalt and white, so it's on hand, because I'll be digging into that. It makes a completely different blue, similar to a tubed king's blue, but I think this is better. Okay, I got plenty of that now. Let's stand back for a second and see how the values are going to go. Yep, I'm going to stand back. Okay. Okay, I had a chance to take a look from a little distance of my painting, and I've decided to make just a minor alteration. I think it would be better with the horizon placed just a touch lower. That isn't a problem because the paint isn't, I haven't gotten married to any brush strokes yet, which I don't intend to yet. I'm going to wipe this down because I sort of like a slightly lower horizon so that, again, it will draw more attention to the cloud. So I'm going to just lower this here section, wipe that down. It's not hard to put it back in. And this will start here. There. I may even lower that tree a little since I don't want it getting into the clouds anyway. You'll see in the end. Sometimes, this is a crucial time when you're drawing it on the canvas. This is, even though I've started filling in with paint, it's still at the lay-in stage. So things can be pushed around and altered a little bit. May want to add a little bit of oil so this rubs off a little bit better. I'm going to lower that mountain. Again, I just want more clouds. Okay, so let's just put that back in. Very faint. Now also, probably towards the end, I'll do that fog effect back in there, or I like that. At the end of the day, there's like a haze that appears. There's a little bit of green in those mountains. Okay, move that down too. Then again, do not use the cloud brush for landscape, obviously. You don't want to get milky, and keep those colors nice and clean. In the distance, now this will be the new little horizon of the distant trees down into here. Maybe we'll use straight purple in places, a little bit lighter. Okay, now I've given myself a little extra room. Come back to this later. For now, I'm going to get back into the cloud, and I'm going to get into all kinds of different mixtures that I talked about. Let's start with blues and the reds and blues in various amounts. Let's take some of this here and mix it with the warm color. And then I'm going to have a considerable amount here of my cad red and white because I'll be dipping into that. And of course the yellow orange, cadmium yellow orange would be a good one. And not too much of this, but I will use this. As a matter of fact, as a point of reference, I probably will put in a small amount of some of the light areas so that I can judge my values from that. Because if I have, a lot of times in a painting, I will just indicate one area in which I'll use the darkest dark, and then another area I'll use the lightest light. So I can work in between those values from there. What that gives me is my widest range. Otherwise, if I don't do that, often it happens that I'll work in a mid-tone range and stay there, and my painting is very dead. So I've learned to give that punch. You push the values lighter, the lighter one's lighter, and the darker one's darker, and your painting will have a lot of dimension, and it'll jump right off that one-dimensional surface that you're trying to escape and create a three-dimensional quality. Okay, well, that's what we try to do. We try to sculpt and produce nature right on canvas. That's good. That color worked. Okay, I'm glad. It's that cad red light that works good with the blue. So I don't mix them too well because sometimes then you lose any little tiny touch of accidental pure color which might come through there. And you might want some of that. You might just, I wipe it off though in between the warm and the cool strokes. But see, in here, I may want some of that warmth to come in a pure form. And if I pre-mixed it on the canvas, I don't, in other words, don't keep mixing. Once you get that mixture done, don't mix it too much. It breaks down some of the pigment of the paint when you do it that way. It takes out the strength of the intensity of the color. I'll have a little bit deeper, the orange in here. I can always work back into it with the cool. Sometimes I'll just overdo a particular color because I know I can go back into it again. So I'll pick the lightest color to work into because now I can bring the cools back in there. And if you remember, I have that wonderful blender brush, which I'm going to get to using. And we will work into that with this. And once you do a little bit of area of blending, stop. Wipe off your brush, pick up new paint. You don't want to overdo it because obviously you don't have good quality, brilliant paint left on your brush and it will just look overbrushed. That's another thing that I wanted to tell you not to do is overbrush. That loses some of the intensity as well. I may use a little alizarin crimson along with that cadmium red in places because you see, and I know I just do a short run of brushwork, just a little, because again, you don't want to lose too much intensity. I just want to get it started in there. I may use an altogether new brush, brand new clean one for the whites. Okay. Some of these tones in here. And then there's some nice lavenders that appear under here. The sun was peeping through the cloud at various points and not equally so. So I'm going to take that clean brush and put in some of that pure white I was speaking about. I may actually just go into a little bit darker of a color. You know, I'm going to have to wipe a spot out for it. I can see that because it's going to get mixed into the blue. Got a little bit of blue in there. Somehow, I have to be careful. Oh, I got to do it again. I don't want blue in there of any kind. Hi, I'm Lynn Gertenbach. I'm happy to be here with you today, and I would like to share with you a study that I did on location that I would like to take to a larger piece. I call it Illumination. It was a magical day down at the lagoons at Malibu Lagoon when I painted a small study. Actually, I was in the midst of painting something else. And when I turned around and saw this huge cumulus cloud rising up with the sun behind it, illuminating it, I knew I had to grab a quick 8x10 and do it quickly because it would only last a half an hour, which is approximately the time I spent on the little study. You see, when you photograph a cloud with landscape, generally your camera, unless you've got an excellent camera, it's very difficult to photograph clouds, I found. Of course, even with a polarizer filter. But since it's air, the camera doesn't focus on it, and it tended to give me terrible photos. So that's why I took the photos after I had done the sketch, because I knew I could get the effect with this. And I'll turn it into a larger one now. Okay, we're going to get started. I wear cotton gloves inside of vinyl so that it protects my hands, and an apron. Why get paint all over me? I'm going to pre-mix some sap green for drawing with a little alizarin, maybe a little of the Terra Rosa as well. So there is also a mountain in the distance. I'm going to probably want to indicate lightly where the horizon is going to be and where the mountain will be. See, I'm just making very bold indications. The actual tree shapes will come in later. I want to show how this river winds back in the distance behind here, and this land comes out there. Again, working in this low value range, just indicating some cools, warms, and close values here, which I can always work into later. I thought I would let you know that I'm laying this in and painting the entire painting with my favorite medium, which is walnut oil. It's completely non-toxic, and when I discovered this is all I use. It has no odor, and it's very good mixed with the paints. Now, safflower oil is also something that artists use in Europe, especially when we travel, because you can find it easily in a grocery store. But I love the walnut oil, the texture, I love the drying time. In fact, you can even clean your brushes with it, and that's sufficient. Otherwise, for a good cleaning, though, and what I do use in my large container here is I have some BioShield number 23 by Eco Products, because I find that it just takes more of the paint off. I try not to use too much of it, because when it gets into the paint, it dulls the color a bit. Got a little bit of blue in there. Somehow, I have to be careful. Oh, I got to do it again. I don't want blue in there of any kind. There. That's more like it. Other thing I wanted to show you is, you see right in here, it's just dark next to light. But what I want to do is mix a transitory color that's another warm, like orange, which I'll place there, and then blend the two a little bit. Whoop, got into blue again. See, it's a real crucial thing to stay away from. Okay. I think this is where I'll leave it. Thank you very much for sharing this experience with me. And I hope you've learned something. And I encourage you to look at my other videos of lily ponds. And I hope this has been an interesting experience for you. Thank you.
That's Illumination from Lynn Gertenbach, and you can learn more about it at lilyartvideo.com. Remember, we have a special discount in the comments section. Thanks for watching.